Okay, and next up for our second session today, I'm going to move us along because I am conscious of time. I would like to introduce our next speakers. We have Simangaliso Nyoni from MacKillop Family Services and Chelsea King from the Centre for Multicultural Youth, who will be presenting on their cultural mentoring program. I'll just briefly introduce our wonderful presenters. We have Simangaliso, who is the Cultural Practice Lead at MacKillop Family Services. Her role is to support the embedding and integrating of culturally responsive practice across the organisation, which also includes coordinating the cultural mentoring program. Simangaliso has a wealth of knowledge as a clinician with a background in social work and counselling. And Chelsea is the senior practitioner for sector capability building at the Centre for Multicultural Youth. Within this role, she oversees the development and delivery of capacity building activities such as training, resources, events, and consultancy services designed to enhance the culturally responsive practice of those working with multicultural young people and families. So thank you for joining us, and I'll pass over to you so we can hear more.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Um, as you mentioned before, so my name is Simangaliso Nyoni, and I am the cultural practice lead in MacKillop, and I do have the honor of spearheading the cultural mentoring program, which is a pilot project in the residential space in Victoria. Before we start, I guess our presentation, I need to start by positioning myself in accountability, in relationships of accountability with First Nations people, acknowledging that I'm actually dialing in from Wonarau land in New South Wales, but a lot of my work is on Bunurong land and also on Wurundjeri land. Um, Before we get into, I guess, our slides, I just wanted to also share that MacKillop actually has an inclusion statement, and I would like to read parts of it for the sake of time. MacKillop, every person at MacKillop has the right to be safe and to be treated justly. We value every person's cultural, linguistic backgrounds, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, intersex status, relationship status, religion or spiritual beliefs, socioeconomic status, age, and abilities as well. Thanks, Chelsea. The cultural mentoring program would not be possible without our fantastic funders, and I would like to take time to acknowledge the three funders who have trusted us to do an amazing job in this project. The Brian M. Davis Charitable Foundation, and Equity Trustees, and also Scanlon Foundation. So we are actually almost in the third year of a 3-year pilot project. And this pilot program was, I guess, it was identified that at MacKillop Family Services, there was a gap in terms of how we were being culturally responsive to our multicultural young people and the families. Um, and that's how this pilot program came about, and it was twofold. Our aim for the program was to, I guess, provide capability to provide high quality, culturally appropriate and responsive care to our young people from multicultural backgrounds, and to also share this a best practice with the wider service system. Um, and I guess the story behind that was that during a reflective practice space, we had a young person who was transitioning from one residential home to another residential space. And as part of the transitioning, there was a reflective practice space that I actually identified that there were some things that were happening in that space with, I guess, well-meaning intentions that were not culturally safe for this young person. And one of the residential carers or the youth workers actually spoke up and said, culturally, those practices can be seen as neglectful or shameful. And as a result of that, an idea came about that we needed to build the capacity and the capability of the team around a young person, and hence the word cultural mentoring program. But at times we found that mentoring got people a bit confused. And there was this idea that people thought that the mentor would be paired to a young person who's from a multicultural background. But the idea of it was that we had recognized that we needed to actually look at our baseline, where MacKillop was in terms of cultural responsiveness, and then actually identify that we needed a really good training to support the work. And also we needed to come together in terms of the care team and building capacity for culturally responsive practice. But I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I'll take you through a journey because the project has actually unfolded in sort of a way where we've come into a lot of conversations with people that are caring for a young person, and that's kind of informed where the journey has gone in terms of the program.
Great, thank you. And hello, everybody. Lovely to be here. So just picking up, I guess, on what Simangaliso was sharing about the overall aims of the project, we've just shared a few of the project deliverables here. And I'll briefly run through at a high level what some of these look like, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth about particular elements of the project that we found really interesting. To achieve this aim that Simangaliso was talking about around internal capability building, we've been able to partner together and develop a few different things that will support internal staff. And one of those things is the development of a cultural support plan for multicultural young people. So earlier this year, we launched that plan, and we'll shortly be launching some supporting interventions that will help staff, get acquainted with that document, and that will be a practice guide and a webinar that will launch internally. And the goal of those things is to support staff to complete the cultural support plan, but also to have those nuanced conversations about culture, identity, and what that means for the young person. We also are going to be putting together a coaching resource that will support specifically the mentors to build their own capacity. Of course, they have lived experience and a passion for this work and lots of skills and knowledge to share, but have also shared with us that there's particular elements of the work that they would appreciate additional training and support around. So we're going to put those elements together in some resources that will help them in their ability to support other staff in their cross-cultural work. We've also identified throughout this project that there's an emerging theme around a lack of cultural safety. And this came through kind of from the beginning when we started to do the recruitment of the mentors, which Simangaliso will talk a little bit more about. And it became clear to us that addressing racism was going to be essential to this work, because that was coming up in various conversations. So as we go through particularly this last year of the project work, we're really trying to identify resources that we can use to adapt and then support people in their conversations around addressing racism, both with staff and also when they're working with young people. So this is kind of an iterative and ongoing part of the project. And that final point there around the cultural mentoring development package essentially is probably a very long-winded way of saying we want to create a model. We've been learning things throughout this process, and we're documenting those things. And we hope that the outcome will be a model that can be used by other organizations. We hope that other people in the sector can benefit from what we've learned in this pilot program, and be able to implement their own cultural mentoring programs.
Thanks, Chelsea. So I'll take us through what the mentoring recruitment looked like. And I loosely use the term recruitment because we set up the pilot project as a volunteer position. That was the vision of the project. But we also quickly realized that we were actually inviting people that had lived experiences who know like the subtleties of culture, but at the same time, we're asking them to come into a volunteer position. So recruitment almost felt like we're going to be interviewing them and then providing them with a salary and thanking them for, for their skills. So we actually wanted to make it um, less of that process, and we wanted to honor the mentors or anyone who was going to put forward an expression of interest. Um, so we put together an EOI, and that EOI was then sent through to all of our Victorian staff. Initially, the idea was that we would recruit youth workers or carers because of kind of their knowledge in terms of how the residential space runs. But the minute we sent out the EOI, we actually recognized that there was an appetite for people from other different programs as well who actually wanted to be a part of the cultural mentoring. Um, so we actually invited anyone who was from, our integrated family services, early help, just to mention a few programs that MacKillop have. And once that expression of interest was sent out, we then decided that we needed to actually do a piece of work that was also encompassing what cultural humility was about, that was also encompassing what cultural safety was about, and that was also echoing the essence of what the project was going to be about. So through conversations with many people, I would get so many ideas and then realize that I had a conversation with someone who said, what about an encounter conversation? Because when you encounter someone, you deeply listen to them and you discern with them. And then we started calling them encounter conversation. And that process looked like inviting a potential cultural mentor to come to this encounter conversation. And there were some questions that we would, I guess, ask them, but we wanted to make it less of a I ask questions, but it was more of also them asking questions back. It was really to, I guess, embody the idea of kind of breaking the power imbalances that sometimes we can see in certain spaces. Um, and part of that conversation was around me jotting down the things that people would say or things that stood out for me. So we ask questions about what cultural safety looked like, or ask questions about what culture means for someone. Would ask someone, if appropriate, what the migration journey looked like. And when the encounter conversation was done, I would then ask the potential mentor whether I could send them a reflective piece. So I would reflect on what stood out for me in that conversation and also invited them to reflect back what stood out for them during that encounter conversation. But people were vulnerable and they would share a lot. They were actually very giving in those conversations. And as part of that, we can now say we have about 22 cultural mentors from different backgrounds and from different programs as well, and different roles and different diversity as well. And we meet monthly. So part of our meeting monthly is to actually, I guess, go through the program deliverables and to see where we are tracking in terms of those deliverables. But there's another part that occurs there. And that part is around really getting some feedback on what they're seeing on the ground or what we can be doing better in terms of embedding their voices. And some of that has made us change the way we actually work, considerations of how we do recruitment and how we ask questions in recruitment as well. And also just ensuring that the staff members feel culturally safe so that they are also, culturally considerate as well. And we realize that for our staff to be culturally considered, it has to start from home, which is why it was important to do the cultural humility or the encounter conversations as well, because we could see the light bulb moment of people thinking, oh, I see what you mean. These are the things that I'm meant to consider as well. If I've got a young person and I want to kind of cultivate their cultural identity or I want to support them in their cultural healing as well. So we had one of our mentors who was quite generous. It was a little, I guess, later on in the project, I did ask people again. I'm like, given where we started and where you are now, why do you still want to be a mentor? And one of our mentors just put it really succinctly and beautifully and said, since arriving in Australia, I lack the support to connect with my roots and learn about my culture. This inspired me to become a mentor, aiming to help young people embrace and celebrate their cultural heritage. By sharing my experiences and offering guidance, I aim to empower and assist young individuals in their journeys to connect with and celebrate their cultural identities. Through mentorship and support, I strive to create a space where young people feel encouraged to explore their roots, learn about their heritage, and develop a strong sense of cultural pride. By fostering these connections, we can build a more inclusive and diverse community that celebrates the richness of our collective cultural tapestry. Thanks, Chelsea. So this may be a little bit hard to see, but I'll try and explain it the best way I can. So we needed to have a cultural consultation process, and that meant that our um, data, I guess our data processes had to be able to kind of identify where the multicultural young people were. So in terms of how MacKillop functions, we have a cultural identity box in our system that is part of our compliance. So our case managers then complete that box, and we get the data from there. And it means that we're able to then see which houses or which regions the young people, the multicultural young people are. And so we also created a booking system. So we have a consultation booking system um, where a case manager, actually, it doesn't have to be a case manager. It could be a youth worker who books the cultural consult. It could be an external person. We do also invite external people to book those cultural consults. Or it could be someone from our clinical team who books a consult and says, look, I do have a young person who's from a multicultural background. And I want to ensure that our care is really embedding embedding culture in everything that we're doing. So once a cultural consult is booked, I do go back to the pool of mentors that we do have to see whether we can match the mentor to the care team of a young person. And that requires a few things. It requires coming into conversations with a mentor as a starting point. If that mentor has quite a similar cultural background, because of those nuances of culture, a similar background to the young person, it's ideal. But that's not where it stops in terms of the matching. We do have a few criteria that we go through. Um, and the cultural consult is then kind of set up in where everyone comes in. We do a really deep dive in terms of what's happening, the history of the young person, the family, and education, and also what we need to be doing better, or what we're actually also celebrating the things that we're doing really well. But in terms of the cultural consult, what we did discover though is that at the very beginning, I still found that people were siloing culture. They would talk about, therapy, they would talk about education, they would talk about that, and they'd be like, no, but that's on the side, though. Let's talk about culture. And people's understanding of what, embedding culture was around maybe connecting young people to activities, or going to a festival, or cooking foods that are part of their culture as well, which is really important. I don't want to kind of minimize that, but what we are asking for is a whole systems change where are we embedding culture in the therapy that's provided? Is the education system considering that this young person is from a multicultural background? Is there representation in the home? Does the home look like a space where it feels culturally safe and celebrating this young person's cultural identity? What does it mean for this young person to walk around society? Do they really feel really proud about their cultural identity? If not, what's happened for them to be disconnected from their culture, and what can we do better to connect them back to their culture, whether that's kind of healing as well, or just being very curious and sitting with them and finding out what it is that we can support them along that journey of connecting back to their culture. So once the consults have been done and the mentor has provided some recommendations or feedback, we really noticed that we needed to come back and hold each other accountable for the things that we'd said would do. So we would have a case review in 6 weeks' time where we come together and go, okay, so we've agreed that we'll do the A, B, C, D. Has this happened? If it hasn't happened, what have been the challenges, and how are we going to navigate those challenges and find other ways to ensure that we are continuing to embed culture in this young person's care? Thanks, Chelsea.
So very briefly, I'm really excited to share some of the evaluation feedback that we've received to date. So we have engaged with Impact Co, an external agency, to support the evaluation of the project. So these findings are from May to September of this year. And the results of this have come from surveys and interviews that have been done with the care team, mentors, and staff. So I guess a few key themes that I'd like to highlight are that those who have been interviewed or surveyed honestly have had a really overwhelmingly positive experience, even in the early stages of the program, which is amazing. So they've really felt that this has contributed to their personal growth and their professional growth. And, as we know, culture and identity is so embedded in all of us. So it's really great to see that that's kind of happening in many different ways for people that have been participating. And they've really seen a shift in the care staff showing a commitment to cultural safety. So as Simangaliso was saying, this isn't just something that's on the side. How do we really center this as kind of just a part of daily practice? And we're seeing that happen through this work, that it's becoming an essential part of their core practice with young people. And they're also beginning to see young people's comfort in terms of their behavior and requests that they provide. So, for example, requesting food preparation equipment to make cultural food in the homes, or attending cultural events, or engaging with family members to maintain that connection to culture. So it's just really amazing to see kind of those really tangible results coming through, and people really shifting the way that they think about this and integrating it into their day-to-day work. And we, are really mindful, of course, of centering the voices of young people through this work as well. So we're working with Impact Co to get feedback directly from young people throughout the remainder of the project as well, and highlighting that in further evaluations. And looking forward, I suppose some of the responses that we've received as well is that there's a real appetite for mentors and care staff to see this program evolve. So, as we said at the beginning, it's been very iterative. We've tried things, maybe they haven't worked perfectly. We've gone back to the drawing board. It's definitely not been a linear process, but we're seeing people say, we'd love to invite external members of care teams like child protection, for example, into these conversations so that they can also be on board and really thinking about culture as a front of mind piece of their work as well. And they've also talked about, in order to increase buy-in and participation, and, this is an internal kind of ongoing piece of work, really just thinking about strategies to increase the profile in-house around the work that we're doing. And, we're aware that this takes investment in time and resources, and it really confronts the way that we think about ourselves and also the work that we're doing. So we know that that's not going to happen overnight. And so it's just this ongoing process.
Thank you so much, Chelsea and Simangaliso. I'm fully aware that there are a lot of key reflections and learnings that you have. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. But perhaps, there are a couple of questions that are coming in, but perhaps if we just use this time just for you to go through that final slide there, that would be great.
No worries. Thank you. I really briefly just want to also highlight in these key reflections and learnings that a really critical part of the work that CMY has been doing with MacKillop is providing tailored culturally responsive practice training to MacKillop staff. And to date, we've trained 450 staff, and we've seen that being a really critical piece alongside. It wasn't a part of the original project, but MacKillop's decided to fund that alongside the beginning of this project. And I think that's been, I'm biased, but a very important and critical piece to the success that we've seen through that work. So I don't know, Simangaliso, any last rushed thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, I just really wanted to emphasize that we have also been listening to the young people. So every time an action plan has been created, we were encouraging the people that are embedding it to really ask, young people's voices. And we've had some informal feedbacks from young people, but we are at a stage now that we want kind of a formal interview and feedback from young people because we have to center them because this is about them. But one last thing, I think, I guess we continue to kind of hear the voices of the mentors that are giving so much to this project. And also we are seeing a massive shift in terms of our culture and just kind of touching on, some of the themes that came up was around, I guess, cultural safety became a theme that came up and that highlighted some issues around kind of racism and unconscious bias, which kind of filtered into some of the practices that we were noticing that there was a lot of unconscious bias and MacKillop was really committed to kind of addressing that. So we held a communities of practice that addressed unconscious bias, and a lot of stuff happened there. That's left us as an organization and as a sector with a lot of homework. But also one last thing, it's meant that we really feel strongly that with the cultural support plan, I know in Victoria, I know in other states it's different. Victoria doesn't have mandatory requirements for multicultural young people to have a cultural support plan. We are really employing that everyone who works in the sector really lobbies and that is part of a mandatory requirement that we have that as a resource.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of the information that you've shared for us today. I think the thing that this presentation and the one before have had in common is that we've actually seen a great example of like a term that we use commonly, culturally responsive practice, just like trauma-informed practice. We've actually seen examples of what that might look like on the ground and had a workable model that that workers can turn to and utilize in practice. So thank you so much.